Hello and welcome to the Droid and Dragon Cantina, a podcast highlighting independent science fiction and fantasy authors. Our guest this week is Cyndi Brec, who has written The Therans, Secrets Beneath the Scars. In this episode, we talked about using urban lore and history as inspiration, along with using other people's perspectives to improve your writing. So welcome to the show, Cyndi Brec.
Well, thank you for having me, Brandon. I appreciate it.
So right at the top, let's tell everybody about the books you got out, if you want to start with your most recent first.
Okay, so I do everything in reverse, it seems like, but I put the prequels out for the Therans so that I could anchor some readers in and just give them like a little bit about my character, my main protagonist, Callie Tresham. And then I dropped in February, just a couple months back, The Therans, Secrets Beneath Scars. And like you like lore and stuff like that. I love myths. I love legends. And that's really what the Theran series is based on. The first book, which is 450 some pages, focuses on a character, Callie Tresham, who doesn't know who she is. She's lost. She's on a search for discovery for the origins of her powers. But what happens is in her search, she stumbles across a conspiracy in another world, and she has to fight against it. But she learns so much about that world, and it opens up secrets to her own personal past and everything. It's definitely a high stakes fight for survival story. And the interesting thing is it is a slow burn romance, but I love this aspect that it all takes place in Ohio, in a town that looks so innocent, but I've done all this world building around this town and this actual historical site that we used to own, my husband and I, for 22 years. And so it's anchored kind of in history and so forth. And interestingly enough, I've taken legends and I've twisted them to fit the story world of the Therans. So
what's the full title of the book? I know it's it's The Therans, and then there's the subtitle.
Yeah, the actual title of the book is Secrets Beneath Scars. And the series is The Therans, but I just put it out there, The Therans, Secrets Beneath Scars, just because for me, it rolls off my tongue, but it is Secrets Beneath Scars.
So did the history of the place you're talking about, was that what inspired the story, or was it something else? And then you find this other information about it, you're like, okay, now I have to kind of work it into the story.
Well, it was kind of a mixture of all of that. I've always wanted to write. I had issues in my past where I didn't think I could be a writer, but my dream inspired me. And it was kind of like living and breathing and working in this historical water mill that was built in 1816. Your mind gets to percolating, and then when you go down to sleep, or at least when I went to sleep, I kind of got like visions, images of like movies that would play in my head of like scenes. If I say that to anybody else, they'd be like, oh, she's weird or something. But in reality, I'm not. I would see these scenes unfold, and it's like, to get it out of my head, I had to write it down. And so my husband would just like kick me or elbow me. Okay, get it written down on the paper and then turn off the phone light. And so once I got it written down, I could fall right back to sleep. But I jokingly say that this character, Callie Tresham, stopped my thoughts. And then it got to the point that I would be mowing the yard. I would get another scene or something. So I started doing the James Scott Bell approach, which you take a sticky note, you use it as like a road sign, so you know where you're headed, because I'm not a pantser anymore. I know exactly where I'm going to write to that scene. I might not know what goes beyond in the next chapter, but I know where I'm writing in that scene. So I know everything that has to unfold. And I'll put up like a 3-act structure, and I could move those sticky notes around on that 3-act structure. But I know that scene is definitely important. But it was a combination of both of those, being the mill history, as I'm a lover, and my experience as a person that loves to research legends and myths and tweaking them, that kind of created this Theran world and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's just
So would you
passion.
say that you always had the writing bug, or was it just, your own kind of interest in like, again, like lore and stories that kind of, inspired you to write?
I always had a reading bug because I had difficulty reading, so I knew I had to overcome that. It's what I read was the legends and the lore and stuff like that. And then I'd scratch my head and I'm like, when I started getting into the fiction books, and that when people wrote them, I'm like, well, I could do better than that. And it's not to say that they did horribly, but I'm just saying I wanted to tweak it a little bit differently or do something, or that was common. And so I think it was more the legend and the myths and then the history that of the mill and just this character, Callie, and her story unfolding just, helped me. I will say I have a very supportive husband, but I also have a daughter that I got to watch grow up. And so while she was growing up, I'm like stealing little snippets from her life experiences and even my son's to like cram into this story. You know what I mean? And yes, it's fiction. There's powers, there's all this kind of stuff, but I would definitely I don't know. I just love to write. So
when you say powers, what are some of the specifics? Like, what are we talking about here? What kind of world are we playing in?
okay, so I don't deal with magic. And the reason why I don't deal with magic is I don't want to wave a wand and this happens. And I think it's great for those authors that do because we each have our talent. But I tried to base it in some level of science, whether it's an innate ability or a level of frequency, because everything has frequency. And so, and I actually tried to relate it to somewhat biblical things. I snitch things from certain areas. This is definitely a clean YA fantasy romance. Anyhow, the one thing that Callie initially starts off with, and you can read on the back blurb, is that she has visions. But she has vision malfunctions also. So relating to her flaw, and she cannot interpret them. And she's not perfect. She's definitely not a perfect character, and she doesn't know how to deal with her powers. She doesn't know who she is.
Well, that's funny you bring that up because like there's been like a big kind of there's been a thing in the last few years. On one hand, it's great to see people kind of diversifying kind of the a lot of the science fiction and fantasy stories out there. But I think where you see people get into trouble, and I mean, there's a lot of just people who are just kind of like jerks, and you're like, oh, why did you put a girl in this? And you're like, those don't listen to those idiots. But I have seen some things where they almost like they don't want to let the female characters be flawed and have to overcome something, Sometimes it's just like they make them just automatically awesome. They're the best that's ever been. And I feel like it's a real cheat because like the good ones, which is like you've seen some of the good stories I've read where you see like they have to do this, they have to overcome struggles just like the men do.
Yeah.
And which is just part of being human. And I admire when people are willing to like let the character be flawed and let them grow into being the heroes. And it sounds like you've taken that approach. Was that something that you did? Was that just like natural for you, or did you actually kind of stop and say, wait, this person needs, you don't want to just have them like come in there just like, boom, I'm the best.
Well, a lot of your, they want strong female protagonists, and I respect that. But I want to grow with my character. When you've got a young character, you can't have them a strong female protagonist. You need to have something different about them. And she has problems and stuff like that. I definitely would say that Callie, right away, Callie's flawed. And the big thing is when you have death from your parents, and that's written on the back blurb, and then you encounter death right from the start of the book, you don't flip the chapter to the next scene and say, everything's great, the world is perfect, my life is great. No, you don't do that. That's not real life. And I was very thankful. The Teen Magazine actually reviewed this book, The Secrets Beneath Scars. And that's one of the strong things that she liked about it, is because Callie, you see the lows and the highs of the emotional struggles that Callie goes through, like any teen does. And when you don't really have somebody that you could outwardly talk to because you're struggling with your own identity, your own powers, you isolate yourself and stuff. So you see her internal spiritual war and everything like that, and all associated with death. Now, the first couple chapters are, for me, they were rough because I was also dealing with circumstances that were rough when I was writing those. So I was able to anchor my own personal emotions into those first 2 chapters. But it's not a horrific story and stuff like that. But it's emotionally engaging. I love that my character shows her humanity side. I love that she wants to help people. But that's actually a curse too. Because if you want to help people and that's your main character wants to help everybody live, in essence, that's its own struggle because you can't keep everybody alive. You know what I mean? But anyhow, no, you definitely ride the roller coaster of emotions.
So when you were getting into writing this thing, were you kind of like, keeping banker's hours, so to speak, where you're like setting aside like some hours will have a thing like writers will have a thing where they will pick a specific time of day from like this time to, say 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours later. And then others will kind of like, it's like, kind of like catching a wave of inspiration and they're just waiting for that wave to come in. And then when it's there, they have to surf it for as long as it goes. Like which approach were you more prone to?
Initially at first, well, it was both because I've been writing, I have all 3 of my main books done. Even the last book in the trilogy is completed. I did not start pitching it or trying to work with my agent until after I had all my books done. And now I don't have an agent anymore, but that's okay. I have a great rapport with him. But the whole thing of it is I started out kind of like, oh, when I've got time, I'll do this. You know what I mean? It wasn't until the 3rd book in the series that I was like, okay, well, these images that I'm seeing are coming faster, quicker, and it's adding pressure on me that I've got to get it down. Linda Morgan, an author friend of mine, she introduced me to writing sprints, and they are a godsend. I set the time aside, usually mid-morning, and I don't want interruptions, and I'll just write. Now, I do ride the wave, though, because sometimes in the summer, there's no chance to write. It's usually because I'm seasonal a writer. I usually hit it fall and winter are my like pump out time. I'll sit and write, but I'm not one of those that will write 10,000 words a day because I do prioritize my writing, but I prioritize my family first. So.
So who are some of you mentioned before, like you had you got the reading bug much more so than the writing bug. So who are some of those authors that were kind of inspiring you or, who you would say are your influences?
Well, believe it or not, I love Sarah Moss. I also love Victoria Aveyard. I love historical romance, but I will have to say I do like Twilight too. So, and I know that's kind of funny. And yes, I'm Team Edward, and that was 2005, 2008. So that definitely dates me. But current books, I really do think Victoria Aveyard and Sarah Moss are some of my favorite, But I switch genres. I don't usually read in my genre when I'm writing. I usually read historical romance and stuff like that. So it's more subtle. It's not as action packed because I usually feel the intensity when I'm reading it. So sometimes it's like, if I get mad at this character, I'm shutting the book because I'm like, well, why would you do that? And stuff. So I'm just off. So I get into my stories. In other words, it's kind of like some people get into their movies.
Yeah, because I was going to ask too, like, because a lot of people that I've talked to, it's not just reading. It's also like, because I'll say, as a storyteller, you can draw your inspiration from anywhere, either whether it's movies or nowadays even video games, because you'll have people there'll be all these cinematic scenes to the point where you'll have enough of them where people will cut them into a thing that you can watch on almost like a full movie on YouTube. So I mean, yeah, it's yeah, you don't have to draw your inspiration just from other books. It sounds like too, you're also like, yeah, I know you like lore and stuff, but are you also kind of just like a history buff as well?
I'm definitely a history buff. I really believe that we need to preserve our history, our historical places here in America, because I've been to Europe and France and Germany and stuff, and their history is just undeniably unbelievable. I mean, you're getting thousands of years and stuff. And the mill that we used to own was 1816. And when you think about that, that's old for here in America.
Yeah, for an American, that's old to them. They're just like, oh, it's a baby.
Oh yeah, it's old. And I love the fact that history is so important to my husband because he's actually building a water wheel, which is 18-foot overshot water wheel for this mill. And even though we don't own it now, but he's a millwright. And so it's just kind of nice to still be part of that. But yes, I'm definitely into history. And I've taken, and the fun thing is that I get into this creature. I won't describe or who he is. But this creature that I have in my book comes from this mill and stuff like this. And it's surrounded by some weird experiences that we had that are kind of like ghost kind of whatever, but it's not ghost, but still. But I took that that little bit of information and morphed it into something so unique and related to the mill because I don't know, I was just trying to bring the mill alive, you know?
So would you say there's a particular area of history that you're more, I guess, focused on or more interested in than others? Or is it just history in general?
It's just history in general because I, through the entire book series, have used real settings, whether it's the town New Cumberland Falls and then Worcester, Ohio is, New Cumberland Falls is made up. But Worcester, Ohio exists, but it's the history associated with Worcester, Ohio. But I've even, in the book series, throughout the book series, used other sites in their actual history to write, whether it's Italy and Egypt and stuff, to the point that kind of bogs me down because I'm so trying to make sure that if I'm working with a specific catacomb or is something like that, a burial site and stuff like that, that I'm getting it right, that I'm looking at the actual map and the structure of how the archaeologists have worked it out and what's the lore behind it and everything. There's so much that is comprised outside the mere pages of what I've written in this world. I mean, it's unbelievable. But yeah, it's actually kind of fun. So
I'm curious. Yeah, I know you said you're definitely more of a plotter than a pantser, but like how much of that world are you setting down and fleshing out before you even start writing, the story itself? Because you see, there's a lot of books where you can tell the author must have spent a lot of time. I mean, even like to the degree of like, there's other stuff out there that you're not even necessarily seeing in the main part of the story, but like they went and colored inside of all the lines and it's just, but like we'll focus on a certain part, but you can tell like they're getting like even down to like minute details. How much of that did you do prior to the story or I've also talked to authors who will kind of let the story kind of help flesh out the environment rather than kind of letting the environment flesh out the story. How is that factoring into your approach?
I don't flush out the story in advance because I think it stifles me. So I'm a mixture. I was definitely a pantser. Now, like I said, the James Scott Bell approach is kind of like I call it a pantser by design because I use those sticky notes to kind of guide my mental car in that direction and use them as a roadmap. But I really believe, for me, if I know the ending of the book and I know how everything's going to unfold, all the red herrings and all the little plot twists, I'm already mentally there. Why finish it? I like to experience the journey as my character is experiencing the journey. I just know a couple scenes ahead or maybe even a couple chapters ahead of where things are going to go. But a lot of the times it's Callie that I'll be writing something and it's like I'm in the midst of it, knowing where that sticky note is directing me, that road sign. And it's like, no, Callie says, this doesn't fit. This is not me. And so I take her route, and it's a much better route. But a lot of the times it backs me in a corner. And then I've got to like, okay, go to my husband and say, okay, with these powers, she's got this. How do I get her out of this? And so, and I also have one other friend that's really great at brainstorming that I figure out how to do this and stuff like this. But I think if you have everything flushed out, and I commend authors who do, because I think it helps them finish their projects maybe even quicker. For me, though, I don't want to have everything flushed out, because I think it looks, or for me, I could tell when I'm reading somebody's book and they have it outlined, and I know that it just seems like it's predictable.
Mm.
I can almost, at least for me, I've had people read my first book and they did not anticipate how that would go. You're definitely not going to anticipate book 2, because I've pushed things way to the max. And book 3 opens up something, in my mind, unbelievable.
So would you say you're
like
taking more of a character-based approach than like a plot-based approach?
Yes, I definitely take more a character-based. But I allow the settings, I allow the history to help navigate and steer that character. And like I said, I do, when I'm writing, I'm visualizing what's happening. And if I'm visualizing something and I get almost like my brain's working in 2 gears, I want it to go this direction, but in reality, Callie's saying, no, this direction. And then that's what I'm doing, you know? So, it's just, it adds more richness, I think, if, and this is just my perspective, if the author doesn't quite know where the ends and how it's going to totally play out. And I know some authors write the very end of the book first, and they then start at the beginning, and they do it. I commend them. I'm not a fast writer or anything like that, but definitely I get bogged down by my history. But you know what? I don't want my books predictable. And for me, I think I could tell if a book is outlined that it's kind of predictable.
Well,
that's my opinion, though. That's my opinion.
I think you can also treat it like, excuse me, you can also treat it like a road trip. And it's like, just because you're going from, pardon me, like say, if you're driving from like Atlanta to Los Angeles, there's a lot of stuff you can hit in the middle. There's a variety of ways to get there. And it's kind of like, just what path do you take?
Yep. And I take the scenic route. Callie seems to take me down that scenic route and stuff like that. And the muses just go. Now, I have a struggle, and I can say this, but I have a struggle writing the male perspective of stories. And that's not an easy one for me to get in the mindset of thinking, how would a man do this? Because I write all this long dialogue or whatever. And a friend of mine who's raised 4 boys, and she's got dialogue done like this, and it sounds so natural. She's like, no guy's going to say that. No guy's going to do that. So I always flush things out with her on that end, just so that I could bring a little bit of realism to the table, and so that there's authentic conversations and dialogue. So
it sounds like you've got at least one good beta reader in your corner. Do you have like a group of people that kind of help you get this stuff together when the time comes?
Yes. Actually, for 15 years, I've been with the same guild, Writers Guild. So they've been my cheerleaders, and I've been their support system. I could honestly say that they have helped carve this path and this journey with me. And there's some in that group that, because we've been together like so long, and 6 or 8 of us have been together the tightest. And some are traditional and some are indie authors, some are hybrid. And we just, we really take that time to, as a group, critique people's stuff. And there could be like really intense conversations, nothing insulting or anything, very constructive. But a lot of the times, some groups won't even get that minute, but we want to see each group member succeed. And they are a blessing to me because some of them are just like, okay, Cyndi, that's not believable, and they'll say, hey, especially when you write fantasy. And there's only two of us, I think, that write fantasy in our group right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting you're talking about your writing groups. I think it's invaluable to have people who are willing to kind of sometimes just tell, like, no, that wasn't good.
Yeah.
It sounds like, so, oh man, I'm just trying to think, like, what are some of the best, like, pieces of advice you got from, like, from within that group?
One, I think it's maybe not like the minute things as much as I knew I could lay out this is who I am, this is what I can do, this is what I understand, and this is what I don't understand. And they could help. I worked with a couple of mentors. Jon Newton, he's a sci-fi author. And he was like, in this guild, he would like try to bring everybody up to his level because he was like studying the anatomy of, what is it? John Truby or, I'm missing the name of the book, but anyhow, he knew a lot of stuff. So he would like educate us. And then that just got us into all of us going to groups where we're learning the craft of writing and stuff. But yet we all had our own personal niches, whether it's Christian science fiction or it's Christian romance or just romance, we just had our own little niche. And I think no matter what, the biggest thing is somebody saying no. That one word, no, is something I think we need to hear so much more in this world. Cyndi, no, that's not going to work. That does not apply because it got me out of my rut and it inspired me. Okay, then I got to think of a way around this. That's not plausible, right? So if it's not plausible, how do I make it plausible in a story setting, a story world to move my character forward? And I think probably hearing the word no from somebody who's so analytical and everything really makes a difference. And it's interesting to see the mindset of women in our group to the mindset of the men on the same topic.
Elaborate on that more.
Okay, so men are, I don't mean to say this in the wrong way. Some men could be, in our group, and I'm only specifying our group because I don't know what other men think like outside in the writing world, because I other than my previous agent, Jonas Hall, I don't know. But sometimes men come from that background of history or science and being very analytical. Women kind of come back from that background of emotion. Right? And so it's kind of, how do you layer those two within a story world? Some people the guys might say, oh, that's too much mush, and I don't write sex, but they might say that that's too much. The women are like, that's what keeps it going. So you have to blend those in and you have to make sure you perceive things correctly and interpreting what they're saying correctly to make that story move forward in a very plausible, authentic, organic way. And so I think that's how I would convey that.
So it sounds like it's really about just finding the balance, because I guess every author is going to have a different approach. And
exactly.
So it's whether, like, how much do you get into the weeds of the minutia of like wherever you are versus. Because it's also like, I think that's a trap that certain people fall into. I see, like, especially like younger writers, when I've had people like bring me stuff and you can tell they get lost in kind of like the only problem with doing the emotion. Some people are really good at kind of writing that stuff out, but then other people, like, it's like they fall. It's like the trap of abstraction, and sometimes I'm curious because, like, it seems like you've clearly put a lot of thought into this. So, like, what would you say, like, or like, how is it, like, where for you, like, what is that kind of way you navigate through that? Like, how do you find that balance?
Okay, so I find the balance with emotion when I'm not staying in the female's head all the time, where I'm writing nothing but her emotions over a scene, over a situation, to where it's page after page after page. What I have learned to do is I've learned to bring in somebody that could be a conversation, to be a counterpoint to her emotional state. And because there can be that counterpart of, like, whether it's a boyfriend, or whether it's another female friend, or whether it's an antagonist, I could bring that conversation, and it makes it more relevant. It makes it more interesting. But then you're adding that substance of the what's lurking behind that other person's motives, that either inspires or could be an issue with Callie, And so that's how I kind of offset it. And I really do believe there's something to be said about leaving each chapter on a cliffhanger. Not always answering the question, giving them enough of satisfaction of the reader, but not answering the question completely.
Well, it sounds like you really, like, you're kind of leaning into the, like, or I guess I'm trying to say, like, I guess the North Star is always like show, don't tell, which is always a thing. Like like any writer that's ever taken a class, that's always the thing they drill into you: show, don't tell, show, don't tell. Mm-hmm. And I think when it gets into the emotional stuff, sometimes the ones I've found that are good at it, it's usually they always find a way to get it either into conversation, not just the internal monologue, because that's where I see, like, mm-hmm. people will get lost. We can't all be William Shakespeare writing these,
no,
to
we
be
can't,
or not to be. But I mean, like, dialogue seems to always be like for me, like, the people, especially if you're good at writing dialogue, like a great way to kind of parse that out. And then also, like, you have someone who can have, like, be a sounding board, and then you can kind of help shape it. So it's cool that, like, that's kind of how you lock into it.
Well, sometimes my best experiences are when I'm in the character's head and I'm writing out 10 pages in her head, no dialogue. So I'm anchored and immersed into that. And then what I do is sometimes it's really difficult to write scenes, especially like if you've had a tragedy in your own personal life and you're writing something very similar. So it's very hard to do that. So, and I've had to do this where I've written out the emotional scene, how Callie would have handled it, all this kind of stuff. And then I've said, where would I gain the most power to, or which person would add the best to complement this scene? And then I throw it into a dialogue situation. I've learned to have to do that because, like, I read a lot of historical books. A lot of that is tell. It's not always show. So, and it's a lot of, like, being in that character's head. But the beautiful thing about historical romance and some of those romance books is that it just seems more real because you're given the chance to taste it, feel it, touch it.
I think it's all about the context, right? It's one thing, it's like you're looking at something objectively, but it's another when you're saying, okay, we're both looking at the same thing, but how do you feel about it versus how do you feel it? Yeah. It's kind of like two people watching the same event, but taking away completely different things from it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'll be honest, I love it when I have a male perspective on a scene that I've written and a female perspective. And I've got my alpha readers and I've got my beta readers, and it's it's about 5 people that I count on. And it's just personal, choice, but still, yeah.
So I know you mentioned you had an agent. Did you shop these books around before trying to get with the big publishers, or were you always kind of leaning towards going the indie route?
I was mixed emotions. There's so much, like, when I was writing these books, and like I said, I have the 3rd book done, in this trilogy. By the time I was in the 2nd book, I was actually pitching to 7, because I went through one of those things where you could pitch to literary agents and stuff like that. So I had 7 of them lined up that day. I had 5 of them that were like, hey, send us the manuscript, you know. It wasn't until that time that very week, I also was interviewing a publicist, because you're not guaranteed, oh, you're going to get, you know, a literary agent that will pitch for you. So I was interviewing a publicist at the same time. Well, I had, and so I was working with the publicist, hadn't signed with him or anything. And then I had known, and I'll use his name, Jonas Saul, because he's endorsed my book, the first book there. I met him at a virtual conference, and he reached out to me this very week while I was pitching to these literary agents and working with this, thinking about the indie route. He says, I want to represent you. He says, do you have an agent yet? Have you put your book out yet? And I'm like, no. And so I went with Jonas. You know, I knew his history. I knew that, because I knew him for a couple years. And I've always, like, even now, I totally believe in the route he's carved out for himself, because he was indie for himself for a while, and then he went traditional. But I appreciate the fact that he had faith in my story world, and he'd seen enough of it to know and validate that it was great. I mean, anyhow, but I was with him for over a year and a half. Though he closed his doors to his literary agency because of, like we were talking about, like the COVID and stuff like that. I think COVID kind of shifted the landscape of where we are at in the writing world. So many more authors so many more people had time to start writing. And so that's got a lot of books out on the market, and it's shifted the traditional market to some perspective too. And Jonas was actually pitching to not only publishers for me, but he was also pitching to Hollywood and stuff like that. But there's so much of a shift in the market. And I will say that I know Jonas knew enough about my book to know that it was totally different than what is on the market right now. So, because it's a dual world trilogy, and very interesting worlds and stuff, in worlds that have purpose. So all three books correlate one thing, and they all correlate. If we forget our history, we are doomed. And so the Therans, and this is no secret, book one is out, but the Therans are stewards of history. But I've got creatures in these books and stuff like that, and I'm not initially up front, well, kind of, but my book's kind of quirky in some ways, but it's deep. It's real, and it's anchored in history. So, but that's my experience with having an agent. And so I'm actually very thankful I'm on the route that I'm on right now, which is the indie route. I get more say-so in my material and stuff like that. I do not regret signing with Jonas, because having signed with him gave me all this time, because he was so encouraging on, Cyndi, if you want to go find somebody that will endorse your book, you go for it. Well, blessingly so, I was able to find several influencers and several authors that were willing to say, yeah, we'll put our name behind you, you know? And I'm grateful for that, you know? And I just, Midwest Book Review actually read it and gave it great ratings, you know? So I'm just thankful, you know? I just hope it catches a bug, because it's a clean book, but it's got a lot of angst and emotional, and it's got a lot of action, you know?
Well, no, it's funny you mentioned about this kind of like paradigm shift. It seems to have really kicked in hard. Like, I think like you said, maybe it was the pandemic that really kind of, was that, I guess, that catalyst that, because I've noticed it went, well, the self-publishing thing has been around for a long time, but there was definitely a shift. I don't know exactly when it occurred, but I think maybe somewhere about 10 years ago, maybe more. I don't know. Like, I don't know if, because like, I don't know, but we went for a point where first there was a stigma behind it to where now it's kind of accepted. And now it seems like people are kind of like going, no, I'm just going to go straight to the indie route. And it definitely, I noticed, like, especially with a lot of the people we've talked to on the show, you see it's starting close to the pandemic, but then the pandemic hits, and then suddenly Now it seemed like a lot of writers got in, like, it seems like of the books of the people that I've talked to, you see a lot of stuff came out of that period. I don't know if it was just because people were stuck in their houses and had more time, but that is definitely a thing. And I'm glad you pointed that out, because it's something that I've seen a lot of, just in the course of just talking to people through the show. And you talk about like leveraging the network. Now you've got like, TikTok, they have what they call book talk, that like now there's this whole, one of the things that kind of got me into, first, you kind of go on TikTok to check it out. But what's kind of got me, the thing that kind of really caught my attention was just this kind of network of support for authors, especially indie authors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
I have TikTok, but I had an accident last September and broke my foot and haven't been able to manage it. TikTok, I'm in of. Now the other social media sites I'm active on. I wish I had that technology to conquer TikTok better, because I know that's a great leveraging area for authors.
I think there's definitely like an art to doing TikTok and doing it well, because I see a lot of stuff on TikTok that kind of just goes, okay, that's just yet another talking head video. And then you've got other people who are kind of really clever about how they put stuff together. So that's another podcast for another day.
Yeah.
So as we've gone past the half hour, tell everybody where they can find you online if they want to learn more about your books, or if they want to @ you on one of these platforms.
Well, they could definitely look under www.cyndybrec.com, find my website. I have the 3 prequels out, and I have the first novel that came out, Secrets Beneath Scars. Book 2 launches next year, and I actually have 2 not prequels, but 2 short stories related to this book series coming out. They each fill some sort of niche along the timeline of the series, but you would look for, I put it on Amazon KDP Select, and then I will be having a book tour, 8-week book tour later this fall, but they could also find things from in the bookstore and stuff like that. So I'm not in every bookstore, and I'm not on Barnes & Noble. I'm no longer on Draft to Digital anymore. So, but you can buy it off my website. There's a link there.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming out, and we'll be on the lookout for all the stuff you got out there and whatever you got coming.
I appreciate your time greatly. I really do.
That will be all for this episode. This podcast has been a Carcutta Media production. To learn more about this show or other podcasts, visit carcuttamedia.com/podcasts, or follow us on social media @Carcutta Media. This recording or any portion thereof may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for use of brief quotations in a review. Copyright 2025 by Carcutta Media. All rights reserved.